Step 1. Recognize and acknowledge that we are powerless over lust and that our lives have become unmanageable. Section 3. The medical research into sexual addiction. The progression of addiction research. For many decades, addiction has been a misunderstood and misdiagnosed illness and has been widely viewed as the result of a weak or defective moral character. In 1969, several prominent people in recovery from addiction testified before a Senate hearing that they felt their alcohol affliction was an illness. However, it would be many years later, in the 1990s, before medical research began to seriously evaluate and diagnose addiction. In 2007, the American Society of Addiction Medicine, ASAM, invited 80 experts to review all of the studies on addiction from the previous 2 decades. Then, in 2011, after 4 years of intense review and investigation, they announced a new definition, classifying addiction as a chronic brain disease. This new definition dispelled the belief that addiction is simply the result of bad morals or personality disorders. Additionally, ASAM declared sexual addiction as a chronic brain disease. For over a century, medical science has relied upon the disease model to identify when a disease is present within the human body. The traditional disease model requires that an organ in the body have an abnormal condition or physical defect that produces symptoms of a disease. In addiction, the damaged organ is our brain. The physical defect occurs in the circuits between the frontal cortex and the reward center of the brain, and the symptoms of these defects include intense cravings that, despite negative consequences, cannot be resisted. Addiction is a special kind of disease that causes intense cravings which overpower thinking and judgment to such a degree that unhealthy behaviors take priority over moral beliefs and values. It is continually progressive and overwhelms the strength of those even with the strongest willpower. The affected areas of the brain. It is important that we strive to understand why our addiction has a seemingly unbreakable grasp on us. Addiction affects 3 areas of the brain. Explained in non-medical terms, these areas are the midbrain, the reward center, and the frontal cortex, which are described as follows. The midbrain is our brainstem or wanting brain. It does not think or make choices or understand consequences. Its purpose is to keep us alive, tell us to eat and sleep, and drives all other behaviors essential to our survival. It tells the reward center of our brain to just do it if it feels good. The frontal cortex is the part of the brain referred to as the thinking brain. Here is where we exercise logic, reasoning, self-control, and moral judgment. It also sends messages to the reward center telling us that no matter how good it feels, we ought to consider the consequences. This is the part of the brain that applies the brakes to either stop or slow down our actions. The reward center, nucleus accumbens, is placed physically and functionally between the midbrain and the frontal cortex, and tries to combine the messages coming from each area. It balances the impulses of do it now with the message of think it over before you act. Medical research has documented that addiction damages the circuits between the frontal cortex and the reward center. In other words, our brake pads no longer work. We may recognize our cravings as morally wrong, but we can't seem to stop even though we desperately want to stop. When our obsessions become severe enough, even the strongest-willed, most mature, and most responsible person will return to using. Clearly, at this point, nothing else matters except our next high. Identifying obsession and compulsion. As a result of the damage to the circuits between the prefrontal cortex and the reward center of the brain, the unrestrained impulse of addiction becomes so powerful that our cravings take over, demanding that we act out even when we know it is wrong. We become a slave to our fantasy obsession that continually preoccupies our mind. We also become hostage to our addictive compulsion, which is an irresistible impulse to perform an act, especially one that is irrational or contrary to one's will and values. It is easy to see, as Elder Marvin J. Ashton explained, that those trapped in addiction are prisoners within their own bodies. The power that drives obsession and compulsion is one of the greatest tools to steal away our agency. As a sister shared, quote, "As soon as the trigger entered my mind, my choice was gone. My ability to choose another path did not even seem to exist. My mind and body were slave to my addictions, and it felt as if giving in was the only choice." Close quote. Ultimately, the more damaged our brain, the more powerful our compulsions. Even though these behaviors may have caused us to believe that we are innately evil, the truth is that our brain has become altered to the extent that we are repeatedly drawn into sinful behavior beyond our power to resist. Indeed, willpower alone is not enough in overcoming addictions. The perspective of the person acting out in addiction is progressively constricted until nothing exists but obsession. When craving begins, reasoning ends. Brain chemicals and the adversary jointly act in an unholy alliance. Nevertheless, it is essential to comprehend that we are not bad people who need to become good, but sick people who need the correct healing solution to get well. Neurochemicals and the addicted brain. When acting out in sexually addictive behavior, abnormally high levels of pleasure neurochemicals are released. Some of these are dopamine, the driving force behind desire that causes us to feel we must have or do something. Adrenaline produces feelings of excitement. Oxytocin triggers a powerful chemical reaction that binds us to our lust-filled obsessive behaviors. When our sexual acting out is motivated by lust, it causes our brain to release dopamine at excessively unhealthy levels, flooding our reward system, thereby producing an abnormal and extreme high. As our addiction progresses, the reward center of our brain becomes rewired, our dopamine thermostat is reset lower, and our compulsive cravings increase. our brain becomes hijacked by our addiction, and we end up repeating the same obsessive behavior over and over. As our intense cravings for lust take over, the brake pads of our brain wear out, causing us to run through important moral stop signs. Satisfying the intense craving then becomes our only focus. The more this addictive pattern repeats, the less control we have over it. As our reward system continues to experience unhealthy highs, simple pleasures are no longer enough. Without a doubt, addiction changes the brain, laying down neural networks that chemically encourage us to repeat harmful, compulsive behaviors. Just as taking alcohol and drugs into the body can damage the brain, medical experts have found that prolonged use of pornography alters our brain chemistry until we require the excitement in order to feel normal. As this pattern continues, the brain can only be relieved by more compulsive use. Nevertheless, there is hope for recovery from this powerful affliction. Many have found the pathway to freedom, and it is possible for all who are willing to work recovery. The loss of moral agency. Clearly, it is difficult to think of a tool more craftily designed to destroy agency than pornography addiction. Due to the damaged frontal cortex of our brain, which is the part of the brain responsible for thinking and making conscious decisions, we are unable to exercise complete control over our behavior. Affirming this truth, President Boyd K. Packer stated, quote, "Addiction has the capacity to disconnect the human will and nullify moral agency. It can rob one of the power to decide." Close quote. Ultimately, when addiction is our master, there is no logic or good choices involved, only the demands of the compulsive behaviors and powerful cravings. President Russell M. Nelson stated that addiction robs us of our freedom to choose. Through chemical means, one can literally become disconnected from his or her own will. Furthermore, addiction does not target specific types of people. Anyone with a brain is at risk of falling into its trap, whether male or female, young or old, married or single, rich or poor, religious or not. Truly, as Elder Jeffrey R. Holland proclaimed, addiction is no respecter of persons. The grasp of addiction is simply too strong for us to battle on our own. As a brother shared, quote, "I see a 6-year-old boy in a tiny rowboat in the middle of the ocean with a handful of marbles. A gray, armored battleship is steaming towards him. He is trying to sink the battleship by throwing marbles at it. I am that 6-year-old boy. My sexual addiction is that battleship. Those marbles are my efforts to overcome the addiction on my own." Close quote. Although immensely powerful, our disease does not provide an excuse for our behavior or give permission to remain in our disease. It does, however, help us clearly see why we cannot control or stop our addiction on our own, and why we need our Savior's enabling power to help us. Healing the damaged brain. Accepting that addiction has damaged our brain can be confusing at first, because it is not a disease that we can quickly overcome by simply taking medication. Even though the impaired brain develops significant abnormal functions, it is a treatable disorder. Medical research has shown that the brain can heal and return to normal. However, our brain will require substantial biological changes and healing that will take deliberate and ongoing effort to restore brain function. Essentially, repairing the wiring in our brain is a daily, concentrated, repetitive process. The results are real, measurable, and often remarkable. As we work recovery, reach out to our sponsor, and surrender our struggles to our Savior, eventually our sanity and serenity will become secure and established. We find hope in the knowledge that we now have solid scientific evidence that working a 12-step program literally rewires our brains for recovery. Today, through CT scans, MRIs, and other high-tech tools, we are able to look deep inside the brain. We can monitor the biochemistry of perception and emotion, sanity and sickness, compulsion and addiction, and healing and recovery. Other addiction researchers have also documented that there are visible changes of recovery from addiction seen in brain scans correlated with the addicted person regaining control of their life through recovery. This healing process over time creates new and healthier ways of thinking, perceiving, and acting by building new neural pathways that will help sustain our healthy behaviors and thought patterns. However, because triggers to use are always present, the work of recovery and maintaining our sobriety must become consistent in order for our brain to heal. It is true that we cannot change the fact that we have an illness, but by practicing rigorous honesty and giving up the dream of overcoming our addiction by ourselves, we become open to the spiritual solution and the help from others who have found freedom from its powerful grasp. The spiritual promise of Step 1, Section 3. Concerning the challenges of our addictive behavior, President Packer affirmed, quote, "You may wonder why God does not seem to hear your pleading prayers and erase these temptations. That test is the purpose of life. While these addictions may have devoured for a time your sense of morality or quenched the spirit within you, it is never too late. If covenants have been broken, however hard it may be, they may be reinstated and you can be forgiven." Close quote. Though we are struggling with a powerful disease, the words of Elder Dieter F. Uchtdorf give us hope. Quote, "No matter your history, if you have faltered, failed, feel broken, bitter, betrayed, or beaten, know that you are not alone. God still calls to you. He will be with you. He will direct your steps. He will walk beside you and even carry you when your need is greatest. No one else is responsible for your personal journey. The Savior will help you and prepare the way before you. This is your great adventure." Close quote. Truly, our Savior will come to us in the midst of our blackest night, when waves toss and winds blow and hope seems impossible. It is especially then, when we are sinking, that we must remember to cry, as Peter did, "Lord, save me." The touch of his hand will then grasp and save. He can also touch our damaged brain and soul and cause it to feel and to think and to love again. As Elder Holland assured, quote, "Trust in God, hold on in His love. Broken minds can be healed." Close quote.